All right, so I don't want to waste too much of your time as we jump into this. Just as a quick reminder, what we're working on is the crafting window right here. We're going to end up making it so we can select our buttons and populate a list here. And moving forward, this will enable us to select a button here and populate our info box here. But for now, this is what we're working on. So let's just go ahead and pick up where we left off from the last video. Today's episode and others just like it are brought to you by the patrons listed on the screen. If you'd like to support the channel in future development, then consider visiting my Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee page, where you can receive various benefits such as early access to my videos, project downloads, as well as personalized support. You may also want to consider joining the community by joining my Discord server, where you can receive help from me as well as the community. So come on over and be a part of the conversation. So now with that one completed, we can go ahead and we can take this to do and we can just go ahead and delete this one. So let's go ahead and move back through. I believe we had another one that was within this function, and we do. It's right there at to do, set active states. Now we need to go into the crafting category button and we need to set the active state. So let's go ahead and double click that. All right, so now inside the set active state, I'm going to take the is active here, but we're not actually going to run it into a branch. What we're going to do is I'm just going to right click and type select and just pick the plain select right there. And I'm going to take this is active and plugged it into the index. It's going to convert this here. So now we have a false and a true here. So now if depending on if this is false or true, it's going to pick one of these two components right here, or one of these wildcards, I guess you could say. It says wildcard right now, but it won't be in just a second. And then it'll return whichever it needs to based off of this is active variable. All right, so what do we need to pass in here? I'm going to go make button style. All right, so we're going to actually end up needing two of these, but I'm going to take this one. I'm going to plug this into the false, and I'm going to add another one, and I'm going to plug this into the true. So now this is going to tell us if we're setting it active, what style do we want to make on the button. So this one will actually be a little bit easier. I'm just going to minimize this. Actually, I guess I can't right now. Hide the pins. So with this, we need to now make slate brushes, and you can make an individual slate brush for all these if you want, but I'm not going to do that for this. I'm just going to go make slate brush. Okay, now from the slate brush, I'm going to open up this drop down over in here. The only pins I need on this are tinting. So I'm going to deselect all the ones I don't need. I need tinting and I need image. Okay, and now we're going to have to change. We're going to go do some work out of this function for the image in just a second, but this is all I need right there. So on this, I'm going to right click the tint, split the struct, and all I want to do is change the color right here. So if this is false, if we're not active, this is the false one. I just want this alpha to be 0. Okay, that's all I'm going to do with that one. We're going to come back and change this image in just a minute. And then I'm going to duplicate this 2 more times. So plug this into the hovered, and I'm going to plug this one into the pressed, and the rest of the ones we don't need on here. So I'm going to hide the pins. So with this, I don't think we've set up our colors yet. So I'm going to set this to my hovered state color. All right, so this is my hovered state color, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag it up here to saved, because we're going to put this into the designer in just a minute. So this is my hovered state. Select OK, and then I'm going to do the same thing for my pressed color here. This is the color I'm going to use. You can use it if you want, or just get a general idea. It's just a rough orange. Let me open that back up for you. It's just a rough orange here that I'm doing. This is just a little bit lighter. When you press it, it's just a little bit lighter than what this one is. So I took this color and then I just drew this slider down. I think just a little bit is what I ended up doing. So not a big deal, just a little bit lighter, so it's noticeable when you press it. And then I'm going to select OK. And again, all 3 of these, the images are going to be changed on this. We're going to actually put a material in here, and we'll go create the material in just a second. It's relatively easy to do. So with this, I'm going to take this make brush right here, make another duplicate. And then on this, I'm going to add the normal, hovered, pressed, and the disabled pins. And this is just going to plug into all of them. So if this is true, meaning this is the active one, because it's going to end up being disabled. So we want to apply this same style to it when it's active. All right, so we're not going to have a pressed, a separate pressed or hovered state. It's just going to all be the same. So with that, I've actually got a darker orange that I'm using. So there we go. That's my darker orange. I'm going to go ahead and add that up here. Select OK. And again, we'll have the image right here. So why don't we go ahead and go do that right now? Let's go ahead and create a new material instance. So I'm going to open up the content browser, and down here in my widgets folder, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this one materials. And the reason why I'm putting it here is because these are widget materials. So I'm going to put it in here. And then within my materials folder, I'm going to create one more folder, and I'm going to do main materials. And the reason why I'm putting the main materials in here instead of my instances is because the instances are going to be used. So I want them to be a little bit easier to find when I'm going into folders. So main material there. Let's go ahead and create a new material. So right click and select material, and I'm going to name this material M_crafting button. So let's go ahead and open up our new material, and over here on the left hand side, make sure your return node here is selected, and we need to change the material domain. We need to change it down to user interface, and it's going to collapse it to be this style. Another thing we need to end up doing is we need to change this to translucent. Okay, and I played with a lot of these. Translucent is going to give us the opacity that we need here. Now this is going to be a super simple function. I just want a gradient color to or gradient that I can use over my color. So all we need to do here is go linear gradient. Doesn't matter which one you choose, they're going to be the same. And with that, I'm going to take off of the U gradient because that's the direction I want to go. So the U gradient, and then I'm going to divide that by a number. So I'm going to add in a single parameter. I just had the one held down on my keyboard and clicked into the graph to get a single value right there. All right, and with that, I'm going to plug this into the B, but I'm going to take this and right click on it, and I'm going to convert this to a parameter so that we can change it in the material instance. I'm going to call this the amount, and for default, the default value of this, I'm going to go 0.5. I'm actually going to probably end up changing this, but I'm going to just do 0.5 because it's right in the middle. And the last thing I want to do over here, I just want to make sure that the sliders, when you're playing with it, unless you specifically try to go outside this range, that the slider won't allow you. So I'm going to do between 0 and 1 on the max slider. 0 is going to totally eliminate this gradient, and 1 is just going to be essentially no gradient. It's going to be solid. All right, so now take this, and we're actually going to plug this both into the final color, and then you can see what we have right there. Right, we got the gradient, even though it's 0.5 right there. So take this now, and I'm going to plug this into the opacity, and there you go. You can kind of see it setting up right there. And I'm sorry, I did that backwards. For this value right here, I'm going to actually do a default of 5. Not 0.5. I was looking at that didn't seem quite right there. And then so the max slider, I'm going to do 10. So now if we come in here, and we'll do this, I'll actually demonstrate this when we get into there. So yeah, that was a little bit too thick for me. So now we got a much smoother gradient right there with these values. So put in a 5 right there, plug both these in, and then that's it. Go ahead and apply it and save it. So go ahead and jump back into your content browser here, and I'm going to right click on the material. I'm going to go create material instance, and I'm going to change its name to just be the same thing, but at the very beginning it's going to be mi_crafting button. And then from that, I'm going to take this, and I'm just going to take it and put it into the primary folder. I'm going to move it there. So there we go. Now we got our mi_crafting button. So if we open this up now, you can see we've got our variables here. So I'm actually going to change this down a little bit for me, just for now. Test it however you want. But see, we got our slider here. So if we move it down to 0, it's solid. 1, it's virtual, or up to 10, it's virtually gone. So I think I ended up in my other project, I think I changed it to like a 3. That's where I'm putting mine for now. You can do whatever you want. The rest of it, just go ahead and leave the same, and then save this. Now if we head back into the crafting category button, and then in here on the image, just select the image and start to type mi_crafting button. Make sure you choose the MI, not the M. And there we go. We've got them all set. So now what are we going to do with this? Now we need to get our category button. I'm going to get this, set style, and the style we want to set is what comes out of our select right there. So go ahead and hook that up to the execution. And then with that, I'm going to take the is active, what's coming in the get is active variable that's being passed in right here. You can just run a reroute if you want. I'm just going to grab it, and I want to check not the not equal, but the not Boolean. Essentially, I want to flip this right here. So if this is true, I want this to be false. If this is false, I want this to be true. So now we take the category button, set is enabled, like so, and then plug this in here. So if this is active, if this is true, then we want to make this inactive. We want to make the button not selectable. So we need to make this disabled. So that's why we're flipping that right there. And then that's it. So go ahead and type in a return node and then plug it in, and we are done with set active state. All right, so before we leave the crafting category button, let's go ahead and jump over into the designer. We need to do some initial styling for this. Otherwise, right off the bat, without selecting it, when we run the game, it's not going to have any of its styling that we want on it. So select the category button, open up style. It's going to drop everything down here. You can see we don't have, or actually I do. I don't know why I didn't have it on mine. So make sure you have your styling in here. The one thing we don't have, though, is we did not put in our image. So if you are at the stage and do have this all set up like I do, then let's go ahead and just add your image here. So again, this is going to be the material MI crafting button. Make sure it's the MI, and just do that for each of the states. And then once you're done with that, we are good to go. So let's go ahead and head on back to the crafting window. All right, so there we go. So now we've got the set active. Now, if you just remember, we came in here, we checked, is what we're looping through, is this currently our active category? If it is, then we're setting its state to is active. If it's not, we still want to proceed. So make sure you pull off the false right here, hook that in, and there we go. So now it doesn't matter if it's true or false. If it's not, we're still coming through and we're still adding to the vertical box. So make sure you get that added right there. Hopefully you guys caught that earlier when I was doing it. So if not, go ahead and add that now. Compile it and save it, and we could delete this comment. All right, so you may have noticed I didn't put a comment in down here for the created event that we created here. I think I did put it in here into here. So we did put it in here. I probably should have set it out here because I almost walked right over it going into this next segment. I almost walked right over it. So I should have put that comment here because that's where we had put the other ones. But either way, I caught it. So now real quick before we do anything, let's just go ahead and verify at to do. So we still have 2 more at to do's to go. Oh, I didn't compile this one, so that's why it showed it there. So now if I run this again, that should be gone. There we go. So now we have this one. Okay, so this is the last at to do that we have at this point. So let's go ahead and set this functionality up now. So let's go ahead and take our categories list, and we want to find a particular category, and the category is the one we pass in. So we're going to find that, and it's going to give us the index value of where that belongs within this category list. Now, the nice thing about the way we have this currently set up is this index, because we're using the array list and we're starting from 0 all the way down when we're creating all the categories to populate in the list, it's going to put it in the same index as it is in this particular array. So now with this, what we can do is we can come over here, we can take our categories, which is the vertical box holding all our categories, and we go get child at index. So now we take this and plug that in there. So now we're actually going to get the child widget from within this category. So now we have this here. So you could technically, even though it's just coming back and you can see there is a widget object reference, you can cast this to the category button and it'll be just fine. But we don't want to cast, you know, we're trying to avoid casting as much as possible. You know, it just, you can cast, and you know, there's a stigma against casting, and you can if you want to, but interface calls is always going to make for more user-friendly coding. So let's go ahead and do that. So that means we need to add our category button into, we need to give it access to an inventory or to an interface. So head over to the crafting category button right there, and under class settings down here on the left hand side for me, it shows the interfaces down here. We don't currently have any interfaces implemented, so I want to implement the BI inventory widgets. It's the one I'm going to put for this, and go ahead and compile it. So now we need to create a new interface function. So open this up, let's jump into our interfaces, and inside the BI inventory widgets, go ahead and add a new function. I'm going to call this set active category button state, and while I'm here, I'm going to give it a category for its inputs. I'm going to go B is active, and then just compile it and save it, and then head back on over to our category window. All right, we'll go back and set that functionality in just a minute, but we want to set active category button state the message. So select that, and I'm going to take this, since we're done essentially with that, we're working on this right now, and I'm going to change this to set interface function. Right, and so now pass in the execution. We'll come back and set this up in just a minute. So this first one, right, we're going to get and find this category list. So once we find this, we want to set it as active, and then essentially we're going to do the same thing here, except for we're going to get the category list, and instead of getting the one that we're passing in, we're going to go find, and the item we want to find our currently active category, because we're going to need to set this to the not active state. So just grab the active one now that we have the new active set, and actually the new active isn't fully set yet. We'll do that in just a second, and then pull off of this. We're going to just duplicate this, find this index, and then we're going to set active category button state message, plug this in, and we're going to leave this as false. So now we're taking this particular button and calling false on it. Now remember, these are all their own instances, right? This isn't just one blueprint that we're calling. These are all the category buttons. They're all their own individual self. So we're calling this specific one and then this specific one. So they're actually two buttons. So just keep that in mind if you're not used to, instantiation and all that and what it means. This is a lot of the reason why we have errors or hard to find errors for access none is just because this is kind of a complex topic to wrap your head around sometimes. I still struggle with it every now and then, but so we'll need to come back and do that. But this is inactive now. So now what we need to do is grab our active category and we need to set it, and we need to set it to what we just passed in. So I'm going to go item category, and this is variable item category. This is what we just passed in. Plug that in right there. And now there's one other thing we need to do. There's another function. Again, this is going to take us down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but we'll get over it. We need a new function called update craftable items, and this is going to go in our crafting window. So let's create a new function and call this one update craftable items. And these are just all the items that we can show underneath the particular category that we're in, both related to the category we're in, as well as is the player allowed to craft this particular item? And if they are, then we show it. So we're going to run this function in here, and I'm not going to set this function up yet. This is just so we can finish wrapping up what we were just working on. So I'm going to head back to update category buttons here, and I'm just going to call that function, right? We don't need any parameters for it going in, but we do actually need one coming out. So in here on the output, we don't need anything for this particular to finish up the function we were working on, but we will need it because this function will be called elsewhere as well. I'm going to call this first craftable item, because what we're going to end up doing in future videos is when you first load up a new category, or when you first load up the crafting window, it's going to take the first item in the list. And remember, we created the info window that's going to give you more information about the item you selected, tell you if you can craft it or not. It's going to take the first item within that list and return it, so you know what information to populate in there. So that's for several episodes up in front of us, but we're just getting the advanced part of it now. We could have came back and set it without confusing you, but I want to just go ahead and set this now. So with that, what this is going to actually end up being is we need to change its type to be BP craftable item, and we're going to use soft class reference. So go ahead and do soft class reference there, and we'll talk about soft class references a little bit more as we move forward. Essentially, this doesn't create a hard reference to this. It only utilizes it when we need it, and if it's not already loaded into memory, then what we'll do is we'll do an async functionality to be able to load this while we're waiting for it to get into memory. And then once it's loaded into memory, it'll stay there for a little while. It's essentially a smart pointer. If you still need something, then it'll stay in memory. If you don't, it's going to go away. But you should use soft references whenever possible. They're just a little bit more difficult to work with, but we'll get over it in just a little bit. So now we have that set up. Go ahead and compile it. Let's make sure that, yep, our function updated right there. So let's round this out and go return node. There we go. Now this function is done. We need to add a comment here. I'm actually just going to copy this one. All right, so there we go. So now it's going to call this function. It's not going to do anything, but it's there. So not a big deal. So now this function is essentially done. So now let's jump back into here and go set interface function. So what we need to do now is we need to go into our button, because remember, that's what this is. We need to go into our button and we need to implement this interface call and this function right here. So jump into our category button. So we already added the BI inventory widget in here. So now we need to go up here to the interfaces, and I gave it a category and set active category button state. That's the one we want. Now it's just going to open it up as an event here, which is fine. Go ahead and just run it off of here. And this is going to be pretty easy. Just drag off of the set active state into the graph and then drag the is active right there. And then that's all we need to do. We're just going to call that on here. Main reason why we did this and we didn't just call set active state directly was because then we would have had to cast to the button. So if we've got 10 buttons there, that's going to be 10 quick castings that we do to the buttons, and that's not something we want to do. So it's just easier and more reusable if we use the interface call. And there we go. That's it. So compile it and head back to the crafting window. All right, so now we got that interface call set up. So now I can delete this to do and slide it on over now. So now we got this update craftable items. So just go ahead and double click on this function and it's going to open it up here. I'm just going to disconnect the return node right there. We'll need it a little bit later. So first thing we need to do is we need to make an interface call to the player character, get player character. Now we don't have this interface call yet. So let's go ahead and create that interface call. I'm going to come back up here to the BI interact HUD. And inside here, I'm going to go add function. I'm going to call get craftable items. With this, I need 2 inputs. The first input, I'm going to call item category, and it's already set on item category for me, but we only want a single. We don't want an array. We need a second input parameter, and I'm going to call this one bench, type of eCraft benches. And then we're going to need an output, and this is going to be craftable items. We're going to be passing out the BP craftable items soft class reference, and we're going to make this an array. All right, make sure you compile it. And now let's go ahead and head back to the crafting window. All right, so we'll come back and we'll set this functionality up in just a little bit, but let's go get craftable items message and make sure we create our comment up here. All right, so now let's take our active category. We're gonna plug that into the item category, and then for the bench, we're gonna just drag in our bench variable as well. So now take our item box, let's get it, and then we're gonna clear the children, and then let's go ahead and drop in a for each loop. Again, hold F down, click into the graph, drag our craftable items return that we have right there, and then just plug that into the for each. So now with each one of these, we want to create a new crafting slot. So let's go ahead and go create widget. We want to go crafting slot. There we go, WBP crafting slot. Now with this, we need an exposed variable here that we have yet to create. So let's go ahead and open up your WBP crafting slot widget. All right, so the crafting slot widget, if you remember correctly, this is just going to be the button here that is displayed for every item that we're allowed to craft given a category. So whatever category we're in, these will populate the list and tell us, hey, these are the items you can craft, or at least get more information on. You'll select this, and when you select this, it's going to give us information inside of the info window, and from the info window, we'll be able to craft it. So, but these are just the craftable items that the player knows about given whatever bench it is that they're trying to access at any given point. Okay, so that's what this is. Now there's one thing I want to do. Now the variable, let's start with the variable. I'll explain this a little bit here. I'm going to get rid of the pre-construct and the tick. What we need to do is we need to create a variable here, and we're going to call this one craftable item. Now we've been passing through the soft references, so we got BP craftable item soft class reference. So we're going to pull this out right here, and let's get this. Now, normally what you've seen me use these resolve class references recently in some other videos. Those really weren't implemented that properly, because when we pull out and we go resolve soft reference, this only resolves, like I said a little bit ago, in the if this already exists in memory. If this doesn't exist in memory, this is going to come back null. Okay, and I know that coming to this point, the way I have this all set up right now, when it gets to this stage, this is null. We have to resolve this ourselves. We have to find this and put this into memory ourselves, which comes down to doing some casting, and that's okay. We're okay with doing some casting at this point, because by using the soft references, we've saved a lot of memory space and usage getting it to this point. And then once we cast it, it's going to stay in there for a little bit until we no longer need it. Once we don't need it anymore, then it's going to dump it out. So this isn't going to work. So what we need to do, and the only way to do this particular process, is in the event graph. Okay, and I'll explain why here in just a second. So what we need to do is drag off of this, and let's go async load class asset. Okay, so this is asynchronously going to load this information. So we're passing the soft reference in here, it's getting it, and then it's casting it. So the reason why this has to be in the event graph is because right here you can see this little clock right there. That is a latent function. Latent functions cannot be called within another function. They have to be called out here in the graph. Other things that are latent like this, like your delay node, drop that in here, that as well. And there's several others like that that are latent. These cannot be, that's why if you're ever inside of a function and you try to call a delay or something and you can't do it, it's because it's not allowed to be in there. So that's why it's important out here to, whenever you're trying to resolve or load your classes from a soft reference, you can't do it in a function. It's kind of binding. It's kind of ties your hands a little bit. And there's been a couple cases when I was creating this that it kind of tied my hands a little bit, but you gotta learn how to work around it, because using soft references is gonna be your best friend. Use them whenever possible. Okay. And I'll try to use them a little bit more moving forward so we get familiar with it. And again, when I go back and refactor my code, I'll try to make these a little bit more user friendly and more applicable. So, all right. So now from here, we take this class. Now we go cast. We want to cast this to the BP. Let's just go craftable item class right there. And because I know that this is what I'm passing in, I'm going to just do this as a pure cast. Okay. I'm not going to have it resolve whether it succeeds or not. This should always succeed. If this doesn't succeed, you've got other issues, but you could check that if you want, but I'm comfortable leaving this like it is right here. Okay. So now that we have this, now that we've cast here, now we can get our defaults, get our class defaults. So before I move any further, one thing I want to do here, because we're running this asynchronously, you can actually pull off of here and you could do other tasks while this is loading, right? Sometimes the bigger your game is, the more information is trying to load. That's why this is a latent process, is because it could take some time to do it. So you can run other functionality while it's doing this. And then once it's done loading it, this is the main one right here. You want to run everything off of. Once it's completed, then we can run the code that we need from here, from the class. Now we can get the class and do whatever functionality we need with it. But what I want to do, see right now, if let's say this is delayed, and we'll show an example of this by actually putting in some delay on this. But right now, if it takes time to load this up, this right here is all they're going to see. They're going to see our default. They're going to get this white thing with a 99 and craftable item right there. Well, that's kind of ugly, right? That's not what you expect when you're playing a game. So what I want to do is I want to create what Unreal calls a throbber. I want to put a throbber in there. So let's go ahead and add that now. All you got to do is come over here to the palette, and I'm just going to start to type throbber. I want to do the circular throbber, right? I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag it right below the scale box. Not inside the scale box, just below it. So now if I collapse this, it's still there. I don't want it inside the scale box, just below it. And I'm going to give this a name. I'm just going to call this throbber. Make sure is variable is checked. Okay, so now let's go ahead and change some information on this. So right here for the padding, I'm going to give a top padding of, let's say 10. And this is just ultimately to center it within my project here. So I've got the padding of 10. So now I'm just going to go center right there. So you can see right there, it's just centered. I want to give it a radius of, it's set for 16, but I'm going to set mine to 15. You can leave it at 16 if you want. I just did mine as 15. It fits in there a little bit a little better looking, I think. And for the number of pieces, I'm going to change this to 10. So now what we need to do, we can't obviously see that yet. We're still going to get the white image in there. So with our thumbnail, go ahead and select your thumbnail. And all I'm going to do, we could make this visible to 0, but I'm just going to come up here to the brush tint, and I'm going to set its alpha to 0. Because if this is up for any length of time, it's not going to be for very long. But as each item loads in, right, they could load in at different times as they're coming. So, you know, we'll have this throbber in here for whatever items are still loading. And this is, you know, a well-known item. When we see this on something, we know, okay, it's loading. So the player can be a little bit more free to do stuff. But by doing this whole async process, even when these are loading, the player can still do stuff, right? So he may not be able to select it and see what's in the information window, but he's not bound to wait for this to continue to load. If you don't do this async and it has problem loading these up, then he's going to be stuck waiting for all this to load. So now we need to come down to craftable amount, and I'm going to change its visibility. And again, we could have did this with the thumbnail as well, but I'm going to change its visibility to be collapsed. And the reason why I really didn't was because I wanted to see the throbber in here. That is why I didn't make this collapse, because even if you make it collapse, you can see right here, you still see it on the screen, but I wanted to see it in here. So we could make it collapse, just know that's back there, and then, you know, just make the appropriate settings there. So with that, open up the scale box again. We need the craftable item, and we're going to do the same thing with that craftable item. Change its visibility to collapsed. So there we go. So now when we run it, all that's going to be away. So if we come back out here into the graph, we need to take the throbber, pull off of here and go remove from parent. So we could just hide it, put it away, but remember, as I said in previous episode, even when you hide something, it's still being drawn. So let's just go ahead and get rid of the throbber, so that way it's not affecting GPU. We release those resources back to the GPU. Okay, so with that now, so go ahead and grab our craftable amount. Let's set text, and the text we need to set is let's go ahead and select our defaults, open this all up. We don't need a gradient. We need the amount when crafted, display name, and the thumbnail. There we go. That's all we need for this particular instance. So now the amount when crafted, just drag it off here. We'll get the to text node and then just plug it in like so. And on this, since we just hid visibility, and it's okay that we hid the visibility on here that's being drawn because it's just in the background. So this is actually a little bit easier. It's not going to be in the background for long before it is visible. Make sure you do the function set visibility, and then we're just going to make it visible. Next, go ahead and grab the item name, which currently isn't set. Let's run back to the designer. If you didn't set this, the craftable name, let's make sure we set this to is variable, and I will call this one item name. Head back out here to the graph, and there we go. We've got item name. Drag this out and set text, and then the name will just be the display name. Again, it's going to give us the to text, and just like we did with craft amount, let's go ahead and set visibility to visible, and then grab our thumbnail. Now we want to set brush from texture. There we go. And then the texture will be just the thumbnail that we pass in there. All right, and then take the thumbnail and then set brush, because we set, instead of making this invisible, now this is where you would make the change if you ended up making it invisible or collapsed from within the designer. For me, I just did the tint, so I'm just going to set the tint, set brush tint color. There we go. And then just expand this, and the color, we're just going to make sure the alpha is 0, and I'm going to set the color to white. I don't know why it defaults to that pink color, but just turn it to white, alpha 1. There we go. So now we have that all set up. So now whenever we load this in, it's going to show us the throbber. We will put in a delay when we test this out. We'll put in the delay in here just so you can see the throbber, because it happens relatively quickly, at least in our current state of the game. So we'll put a delay in there so we can see the throbber. It'll delete it, throw it all in there. So hopefully this makes a little bit of sense. Let me know down in the comments if you have any questions. Otherwise, you can come on over to the Discord and we can talk about it a little bit further there as well. All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up right here. The video is starting to get a little too long. If you found anything in here useful, go down and hit that like button. Leave me comments if you have any questions on what we've done so far, and hit that notification bell while you're down there. You'll get notified whenever I upload the next video to this series. And if you have any questions that are a little too long for the comment, come on over and join the Discord. Until the next one, peace.